a little word or two about the, since this is the first such meeting, about what we have in mind. So I'm going to share my screen. And the general idea is that for our schedule, we're going to have, our provisional idea is to have 4 meetings a year. So these events will be in January, April, July, and October. These being 4 months, these 4 months each being 1 month after the publication date of our quarterly journal, the British Sundial Society Bulletin. And you can see the June issue on the left. Now, we don't quite know yet the precise dates and days on which these meetings are going to be held. But I'm certainly, as far as the day of the week is concerned, I'm very happy to have guidance from those of you who are attending. And so here is my email address, chairman@sundalsoc.org.uk, and I'll keep that up for a while. And today, of course, for most of you is a Tuesday, maybe 1 or 2 of you staying up very late so that it's on a Wednesday. But if you have a distinct preference for Thursday, just let me know. And it may be that 2 days of a week turn out to be more popular than others, and we can alternate between them. So that sort of thing, I'm very happy to take guidance over. Now, although we don't know about the precise dates yet, we are very much constrained for the starting time to be either 16 hours or 17 hours UTC. And translated into UK time, that means 5 p.m, 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the UK, both summer and winter, hence for 2 different times. You will, of course, be sent notifications by email in advance of these meetings, just as you were this time round. I'm not proposing to change that for the next time or 2. You'll get a preliminary notice and then the Zoom invitation itself. Now, I ought also to say something about the format of each meeting. This is very likely to evolve with experience. I'm a great believer in trying something, no matter how badly it goes, we can learn from the experience. Without the experience, you don't quite know what to expect. And as with almost any Zoom meeting, there are going to be a sequence of topics. And in this case, our provisional proviso is that each topic should be at least inspired by something, some article or tidbit in the most recent issue of the bulletin. And that's why I asked in my preliminary email for suggestions. And I was expecting 2 kinds of suggestions. One which is the form of a request for clarification. I much enjoyed Article A, but I really didn't understand diagram D. Please could somebody explain what's going on there? In which case I would ask the author or perhaps somebody else to make such clarification. And that's the kind of thing I will do with that sort of suggestion. The other kind of suggestion is the Zoom equivalent of a reader's letter. I greatly enjoyed Article B, but there are several things which I feel could usefully be added if that's all right by you. And almost certainly you will be given the chance to say extra words about that. Now, let's have a look at the a kind of skeletal version of the contents of this issue. Some things stand out as being not for discussion. At the very top, we have the editorial. I'm not proposing to discuss that. Or at the very bottom, the reports and accounts, extremely dry things to look at, although they will be noted at the AGM at the Newbury meeting in September. In the middle, there are 2 other items which don't have authors. The Battle Abbey dial, which seems to be a repeat of something 2 lines higher. It is, in fact, a kind of postscript to the Battle Abbey dial article by Peter Ransom, and so there's no point in discussing it again. And I'm also ruling out discussion of the conference report, conference being held in Exeter in April. So with those items removed, this leaves us with 10 items potentially on the agenda. And we could say, all right, let's suppose we budget for 70 minutes and we have 10 articles, 7 minutes each. That's definitely not the way to do it. Some of these are going to have almost no comment. Some of them will have quite a lot. And I just anticipated, maybe incorrectly, that 3 would have quite extended discussion. Let me indent those. The Hong Kong dial stands out as having some intriguing photographs with no explanation, or essentially no explanation at all. And I'm delighted that Jeff Thurston has agreed to talk about the Hong Kong dial, and indeed he's done quite a lot of research on that. So this will be a mini talk in its own right. Immediately following was Frans Mace giving an article on the Belgian altitude dial. This seems to have caused a great deal of interest. It's been published, article about it, not only 3 times now in the British Sundial Society Bulletin, albeit one of them a reader's letter. It's also featured in the North American Sundial Society Compendium. And Frans Mace himself ends with a question. And Jeff and Graham Stapleton, our noted treasurer, has agreed to address that question. The final article I thought might merit extended discussion, maybe not, is Peter de Groot's article on a puzzle dial. I just feel this is an intriguing, simple thing that people might have something extra to say. But enough of the preliminaries. I go back now to the top, the David Coffin's article about the orrery quadrant. Now, this is an absolute masterpiece of an article. It certainly merited our having pole position as our lead article, and so intrigued by it was I that I've asked David in a moment to say something about it. This the British Sundial Society has as its mission statement to introduce the public to the science and art of mnemonics. Well, this article very much talks about science, very much talks about art. It talks about lettering. It brings in fine art. It even brings in the Hans Holbein, well-known ambassador's painting. It's got just about everything you could think about. Tools, leather, the lot. But that's not me talking, or it shouldn't be me talking. I see that David is with us. I'm going to unshare my screen now. And David, very welcome to this meeting. If you are there, maybe you could introduce yourself and say what it is that you might add to that article you wrote.
Hello, yes, I am David Coffin. Thank you for the very kind remarks about the paper, and greetings from New York, where it's just as hot as much of the continent has been. Indeed, you asked for a bit of the backstory, perhaps. As you see on the cover of the journal of the bulletin, this is a very early ivory orrery quadrant for determining time at all dates of the year, but only for a fixed latitude, this latitude a bit south of Paris. The quadrant first became known to most people 9 years ago, when it appeared at an auction in the center of France. And it wasn't a small auction. It was very well publicized in the Gazette de l'Hôtel Drouot, the equivalent, if you will, of the Antiques Trade Gazette in England. And we were very much intrigued by this object. It made a great deal of money. No one knew who made it, but because it's dated 1518 and has this wonderful original case, and is one of very few quadrants from that period, certainly, that appear on the market, the price was not low. Nevertheless, we eventually wound up with it, and ever since have been researching it for the last 9 years, on and off. and with the help of various experts. And I think it's pretty well described in the article, physically, and as you say, provenance and an argument for the maker. It's clear to me that it was made by Oronce Fine. You asked about the pronunciation, Frank.
Oh, yes.
Oronce, the first name, and Fine, F-I-N-E, a French name, sometimes written F-I-N-E with an accent mark over the E, which would be Fine. And there's been a lot of discussion over the years as to which he intended and which it should be, but it seems like Oronce Fine wins out. Now, he was an extraordinary polymath in the early 16th century, an author of many books on dialing, on astronomy, on other subjects, and included, in fact, quadrants, one of which has exactly this layout of the hour lines, which is special because the zodiacal dates, the calendar dates, have been squished and expanded in sequence in order to create linear hour lines instead of more frequently seen curved hour lines. So he was a good candidate as the maker. Exactly the right time period, publishing on this. And then you start looking at two objects, the only two other objects that are known by Oronce Fine. One is signed in Italy in the Museo Poldi Pezzoli. And comparing the number punches, we find the same punches. A few years later, 1624, I believe, for the other ivory dial. The other object he made are modifications, brilliant modifications, to a Renaissance planetary clock, which is in Paris. But furthermore, you study the case and you find on it the armorial, indeed, of Bishop Michel Boudet, who was Fine's supporter, benefactor for many years. So it seems inconclusive. It seems absolutely conclusive that this is by Fine and is quite a remarkable survival. I hope that answers what you were looking for.
That's absolutely wonderful. I'm most grateful to you once again. And indeed, the obvious question for me is, when are we going to get another article from you? I could read what you write almost indefinitely. Yeah, thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions for David while he's with us?
If I may answer you as to the next article, I used to be many years ago a planetary astronomer writing articles, and I had forgotten how very much time it takes to do the right thing. So it may be a while, Frank.
Yes, I'm very sympathetic to that. As members may have noticed, it's a long time since I've written an article, but I will write one for the next bulletin, albeit a nice short one. Well, thank you very much. Let us now move on to the next. I can't see on the participants list any hands raised. Martins, can you see anyone?
There are no hands raised at the moment, but okay.
Let's
Please.
move on to the next.
No, there is one. Yeah.
Who is that?
Yep. Craig. Yeah.
It's me, Chris Lasby Taylor.
Chris. Yeah.
All right, Chris.
David, you comment on the very great similarity between the hour scales on this quadrant and those visible in the ambassador's painting by Holbein. Have you actually compared the two to see whether they do appear to be sort of geometrically the same?
I think from what you can see in the Holbein there are slight differences. And the Holbein painting is extreme. Well, a slight difference, for example, is in the Holbein painting, there is a shadow square. I'm just looking at the image. It looks like umbra versa, which is not on the present dial. The present dial has all the scales on the back as well to correlate zodiacal date with calendar date. And the Holbein painting is extraordinarily detailed and accurate. And if you look very closely, I would judge that the white orrery quadrant in the Holbein painting is probably painted on wood. If you look at the right edge, it seems like a wood substrate. But whether there's craquelure in the painting or that's in the quadrant, I don't know. It could be ivory, but the similarity is quite remarkable. You'll also notice on the Holbein, the alternate degrees are not exactly hatchered, but the degree marks are black, white, black, white, black, white, which was often done at the period, but is not so on the ivory quadrant.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that if this quadrant has got straight hour lines by virtue of a most unusual way of adjusting the declination scale,
Right.
And the Holbein one has also got straight hour lines, it really looks to me like they've got very similar provenance. So that'll be quite something to look into, I think.
Very, very much so. I don't know. I'm sure there have been many studies of the ambassador's painting of the instruments in it, but I haven't gone further with that.
I myself studied the polyhedral dial just in front of it, and I was convinced that it was made for a latitude of around that of Mecca, which seems a little bit curious.
Fascinating. Well, you need to move on to the dial behind it.
I shall do so. You're having drawn my attention to it. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you both. I think maybe it is time we moved on to the Article 2. So, Martins, if you can note that, and I call upon Jeff Thurston to address us about the Hong Kong dial, and Jeff is going to share his own screen.
Okay. Go.
Okay, I hope you can all see the screen now.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Jeff Thurston, and really this presentation comes with a bit of a health warning because I've never been to Hong Kong. I don't speak Chinese, and I know very little of Chinese culture. However, with the aid of the photographs and the designer's website, you see the designer there is Simone Bartolini from Italy. And with the aid of those two things and a bit of mnemonic knowledge, I've tried to interpret the sundial. It's actually known as apparently the Light of Enlightenment Monument, but the designer calls it a mnemonic fountain, and that sounds good enough to me. The fountain part is a bit at the top. The water falls off the little umbrella here into the reservoir beneath it. And the dial part, the interesting part for us, is all around the base, which is octagonal. You will notice throughout this presentation, there are two standards of photograph. One is taken from our Intrepid Traveller, which are good, clear, sharp photographs, and the others are taken from the website, which are rather fuzzy, but it does show the dial as it was when installed, and it has weathered considerably since 2006 when it was installed. So that's the reason for showing the two types of images. So with no further ado, let's move on to those 8 faces. In plan view, this shows that the 3 northernmost faces are all provide us with some kind of data. I'll discuss those three faces. The remaining 5 faces are all sundials, and I will again describe them, so I'm not going to harp on it now, but they are paired so that the east and west dials are of a similar type. The southeast and southwest dials are also of a similar type. So we have 3 types of sundials here. Let me start though by describing one of the information panels. Basically shows a map of China, and it shows the extent of China, which is over 4 time zones. And despite that, apparently the Chinese government have decided they're all going to show the same time, and that will be based on the meridian at 120 degrees east, which is depicted on this picture. Let me control my pointer. Yeah, so down here, it's labeled 120 degrees east, which goes pretty close to Beijing, as you'll see. And here is Hong Kong, down on the coast. Hong Kong is at a latitude of about 22 degrees, and here is the Tropic of Cancer at 23, 26 degrees, just north of Hong Kong. Which means that the Hong Kong time differs from the standard time by about 23 minutes and 11 seconds. I can't quite see that on my screen at the moment, but it's 23 minutes and 11 seconds different. So that's what we learned from the first face. The next one is as the dial was installed and was a bit fuzzy, but it shows how to operate the dial as a moon dial. It goes to some trouble to show the phases of the moon over here, and really it only works when the moon is close to a full moon. And this little correction graph down here indicates how we do that. And to see it more clearly, let's do that. So at full moon, the moon is 12 hours away from the sun. It will illuminate the dial and there'll be no correction required. But if it's not full moon, then the moon is moving around the ecliptic at about 48 minutes per day. So after 5 days, it will require a correction of 4 hours. And that's all this graph does. So with the right kind of dial, which is any dial that measures the hour angle of the body, we can use a sundial by the moonlight to show the time. More of this later. The next information panel is the familiar equation of time graph. The only thing to note is the Chinese characters at the top, which are the months of the year. Conventional months of the year, 1, 2, 3, and so on. So not much more to say about that. But we can move on now to the eastern face of the dial. It's a fairly simple dial, reclining at 45 degrees with a nodus here. The declination lines of the sun are labeled here with both the traditional signs of the zodiac and the Chinese equivalents, which again are depicted over here. So here's Aries and the Chinese equivalent to it. And these depict when the sun enters the particular zodiacal signs. What about the timekeeping? Well, this is a fairly conventional dial, albeit it's reclining at 45 degrees. And we'll find that all the hour lines will actually meet in a point. If we draw those in, extend the hour lines back, they all meet in a point down here. And we could equip this dial with a conventional triangular gnomon, with an angle down here of 22 degrees, matching the latitude of Hong Kong, and passing through the tip of the nodus. And and standing vertically, of course, in the plane of the meridian, and that would cast shadows on each of these hour lines. And really, I think there's nothing much more to say about that dial. So we'll move on to the west face, which is a companion to the east face. And here we see that the declination lines have been labeled using different symbols, which are an alternative division of the zodiac, sometimes employed by the Chinese, and dividing it into 24 parts, each of 15 degrees. So you'll see that each one of these is now labeled. What I would like to discuss, looking at the west face, is its use as a moon dial. The time showing here is about 2 hours and 40 minutes past noon. And if we're at the time of full moon, then 12 hours later, the moon would be in effectively the same place as the sun was in the sky. And so it would also be showing 2 hours and 40 minutes, but past midnight. The point to bear in mind, though, is the declination of the moon will be dramatically different from that of the sun. In this case, the sun is relatively low in the sky, so it's a winter sun. And in the winter, the full moon is high in the sky. And so the illumination of the shadow of the nodus cast by the full moon will be down here somewhere. So we can't tell the date from the moon shadow. Let's move on. This is the southeast face of the dial, and it shows the hours from sunrise and the hours still to go to sunset. Originally, this symbol was gilded and supposed to, I think, to show the sunrise, and down here we have the sunset. So the sunrise on the easterly face would be shown along this line here, which of course is the horizon plane projected through the tip of the nodus. So this is the sunrise. This is 1 hour after sunrise, etc. Sunrise. And similarly, this is the hours to go to sunset. If we look at the corresponding southwest face, you can see here how the gilding was supposed to be. But this is west facing, so the horizontal line here, the horizon line, it shows the sunset. And so this is the sunset line, and this is 1 hour to go, 2 hours, 3 hours to sunset. And these are hours elapsed since sunrise. As with all these dials, if you take the point of intersection of the 12-hour line with the 0 line, that indicates that this is a 12-hour day. If there's 11 hours past sunrise and 1 hour to sunset, it's also a 12-hour day. And you can it's the same thing with the 10 and 2 and the 3 and 9, etc. And if you join those lined up, you'll find there's a straight line, and that, of course, is the equinoctial line. Now we come to the south-facing dial. which is principally a calendar and shows the altitude of the sun as well. This shows the declination of the sun throughout the year from -23 to +23 degrees. And it's also labeled with the Chinese conventional signs for the calendar, which we met when we saw the equation of time graph. And these are subdivided into 10-degree segments, in 10-day segments. So we can, as the sun moves across one of these declination lines, it also tells us the date using this calendar symbol. The interesting thing happens as we come closer to Midsummer Day. When the sun's declination is +15 degrees, it comes in here, and these arches are the altitude of the sun. So at 15 degrees, it comes across 60 degrees, 65, 70, 75, 80, and comes to about 82 degrees. And then it decreases throughout the afternoon as it moves across. At about the 4th of June and the 9th of July, the sun will actually pass overhead in Hong Kong. But what happens after that? Well, it's difficult to see on this dial because it's Hong Kong is so close to the Tropic of Cancer. But what we can do is move the dial south to about 10 degrees north of the equator. And this makes the situation clearer. In this case, on about the 16th of April, the sun will pass overhead through the zenith and out again. And on the subsequent days, as we get closer to midsummer, it will pass, but it will never go through the zenith. It will go to 80 degrees, 85 degrees, 87 degrees, and so on. But this time it's passing north of the zenith. And it won't return to the zenith until sometime in August as it comes back going south. The only other thing to note on this face of the dial is the noon mark with an analemma. And as far as I can tell, this is not displaced to the east or west, so it presumably shows the local mean noon. And really, I think you now know as much about this dial as I do. But if you'd like to correct me or ask any questions, I'll be happy to take it.
Well, that's an absolute masterly presentation, Jeff. Thank you very much indeed. I'm looking at the participants. Any hands up? Afraid my eyesight isn't up to this, but Martin's can probably tell us.
No, no hands up, and also no questions in chat.
Can you hear me? I don't seem to have a picture
Oh,
of me.
yeah,
So
yes, yeah.
it's Kevin Carney. Can you see a picture of me?
No.
No, I don't know what's gone wrong. I haven't worked that out. No, the question I wanted to ask was that because Hong Kong is so far away from the time zone meridian through Beijing, I couldn't quite make out on the dials whether or not the hour lines had been displaced by the appropriate amount. Because the equation of time that they show is just the standard equation of time for local conditions. So the question is, are the hour lines offset from what you'd expect true north, true south for noon?
No, I haven't done the calculations on each of the dials, but they don't appear to be for me. What you have to apply is what did I say? It was about 23 minutes. As a correction, plus of course the equation of time to arrive at China Standard Time.
Now, fair Kevin, this is not a sundial you'd approve of. It tells local apparent time, as far as I can see, apart from when it's saying hours till sunset, hours since sunrise, and all that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jeff. I think maybe we should be moving on. So if you can unshare, we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the lost my crib.
It's Belgian altitude
Belgium, yes, of
dial.
course. Yes. Now this is where
Yeah.
Graham Stapleton is going to come in for this one.
And actually, I see that the author of this article is participating in the call as well.
All right, so we've got France around and Graham. Well, France at the very end asks a question, and so maybe France can pose the question himself and let Graham answer it.
France, please.
Okay. So do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my question is, or a rhetorical question, of course, at the end. Why would there be a string with a plumb bob if it wasn't to keep the string vertical, and which fits in with using the dial as on the last photograph?
Yes. Well, Graham, are you there? Can you address this?
Ahoy, can you see me?
Yes.
I see my words coming up on the text, but
So we can see you. Please.
Right, okay, that's fine. Right, so the focus of the article is on two possible ways that this dial can be used, and there's a speculation which may be easier. Now, just first some observations about the original dial as seen. Firstly, there is no sighting or shadow device of any kind, nor traces of any lost ones. So a question to go out there: does anyone know of an instrument for taking solar altitudes without a sighting or shadow device? Now, the weighted cord is a plumb bob, simply to establish the vertical. The bead is not adjusted for solar declination as in other instruments. Now, here we come to a caveat. On the original, we do not know if the cord and bead are original or even in the correct position. We believe that a peg was inserted to cast a shadow, but this again has to be an assumption. Right, I can't see myself, so people are going to have to do a signal if it can't be seen.
Michael, are you still sharing a screen?
I'm stopping the screen share. So Graham, yeah, you can show in your camera your prototype, please.
Right. Well,
if people go into speaker mode, then you can see Graham in full.
Right. Well, just to clarify, this is a scale model of the dial, although it's taken actually from Mike Cowham's book, so there are some small differences. I still can't see myself, so I just have to hope I'm visible.
Yes, you are.
Right, good. Now we'll observe, first of all, there is a left-hand arc.
Up higher. We can see your, yeah, that's better. More,
Right,
higher,
okay.
higher,
Higher.
a bit higher still.
Yeah,
that's better.
Yes,
right.
Perfect.
Okay. The left-hand arc uses sunrise and indeed sunset times as a proxy for solar declination. Summer solstice at the top, winter at the bottom. The right-hand arc shows the maximum range of daylight hours for that latitude. Now notice that reading horizontally between the two scales, the time of sunrise or sunset accords with the figure on the opposite scale. Also notice the angles between the noon point and the ends of the date arc are those of the sun at noon on the solstices. Right, turning to the possible methods of use as described in the article. The method one, now let me drape the cord over as illustrated. Now, Now, imagining the sun to be up here, in strong sunlight, light or shade would be seen along this short side. And if held correctly, for the altitude and also the plane of the azimuth, that would be one means of aligning the whole dial. It would also be possible to observe the shadow of the peg, which we suppose to be there. And so long as that shadow lay parallel with the short side, that again would be aligned. The plumb bob, as you will see, is too short to reach the hour scale, except under very limited circumstances. As I say, this takes us back to the question of what exactly was the original. Changing now to the second method, of which there are two variants, but essentially the dial is held up by hand, and the long edge is judged by eye to be horizontal. Or you can use the plumb bob free and gauge when it's at a right angle, or drape it over the peg and gauge when it's parallel with the short side here. In all of those cases, you're going to have a good eye for judging these things. And once set, but it's horizontal and in the azimuth plane, the shadow of the peg will read the time directly on the scale. The other variant is it is suspended by the cord, and again rotated to the azimuth, and the time is read directly. Now, in this, I observe that the original dial has a very small area and so very little wind resistance, and it can very easily be stabilized with a fingertip. A peg used for casting a shadow, I assert, would also constitute so little of the overall weight, but its position is not going to create any meaningful turning moment to alter the dial's suspension. So if it is this case, the function of the bead may simply be to stop the cord running through the hand holding it. So my initial conclusions is that it'd be much more conventional if the cord were threaded through the slot of the date scale. There are plenty of instruments where that is the case. However, we have no evidence for that either way. In my own experience with this model is that it's actually much easier to suspend the dial by the string than hold it and try to achieve a horizontal, even in something of a breeze. Although really, without a further examination of the nature and condition of the cord and the bead, a firm conclusion is going to be hard to reach. That's what I have so far. So that sets the terms for the discussions and observations, please.
I see Steve Lilievre is on the list of participants too. So Steve, have you got a question?
I don't have any questions as such. I'd just make an observation that in the article that I wrote with Sue, it's true that we assumed that it was used in the simple horizontal position, but that was really an omission on my part. We didn't intend to imply that either method 1 or method 2 was the correct one. So, and actually, with my own playing around, I've actually found the method 1 to be slightly easier to operate than the method 2. And that's all I have to say, really.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I think time is moving on, so maybe, Martin, it's time we had a look at the next article. This is Battle Abbey, which I think won't take us very long. If you can just share your screen and show us the bulletin again. That's the second article of Battle Abbey, but never mind. I think let's just dispense with Battle Abbey. It is a very self-contained article. We have on the right of your screens now, we have the Wooden Sundial Puzzle by Peter de Groot. This I thought might lead to lots of discussion, but nobody responded to that. So unless anybody's got any questions on it, I think we can turn the page over and look at the more substantial article on the following page by Johan Wikander. He comes, no, you've gone past, moved.
Okay.
Next page.
Yeah.
There, that starts
Yes.
there.
Mhm.
Anybody got any questions on this article? If you just, he describes 3 sundials, all very much the same. Well, the first one is a bit like an English mass dial. It's, I think, a vertical dial. If you turn over the page, next page, there, yeah, that's there. You can see top left, bottom middle, and bottom right of the 3. Well, top left and bottom and middle are the 2 ancient Scandinavian dials that he describes, and there's this runic character at the bottom. Anybody got anything to ask or discuss about these? Because if not, given that time is moving on, let's move on to the next article. No, that's backwards.
Going
Going the wrong way.
Which one exactly?
After that one, it will be the
It's
yes, go past the conferences here. Yes,
yeah.
Irene Brightman. I know
Okay.
she's a participant. So, Irene, have you got anything to say about this, your article, that you would like to tell us about? You unmute her, she can perhaps. No comments. This it's quite an interesting collection of stone sundials. They're all very simple, just a vertical pillar with a horizontal sundial at the top. Now, if you've ever worked in stone, you'll know this is actually, you've got a slight puzzle here, because you're working on, as it were, you're either working on end grain or your stone isn't going to work properly. But they're much of a muchness, but you just read through them, and she's got them in several orders. So if you keep going through the pages.
There's one remark by Sarah in our chat. So
all right, so let's bring Sarah on. Yes.
Yes, please. If Sarah would like to tell us.
Hi. So I was just remarking on the sundial, the one out of wood that we were hearing about earlier, that it reminds me very much of the Zapek type sundials that were made by Stefan von Gutz and Son and others, and which would have had some kind of pin in the date scale and to put light on to shine the shadow onto the hour scale. It looks the same projections and all, and I presume it would work the same way. And I don't know if anyone commented on that similarity. I was just trying to pull up a picture of one of these that I'm referring to, but while you put me on, so I'm stopping my search at the moment, but that was just, it would seem to me it would work. Well, I don't understand why it wouldn't work any differently than those. So just a comment.
Yes, so thank you very much. Precisely the sort of contribution I'm hoping for. Let's move on to the next article. Keep going. Yes, there. This is Nicola Toop, who is not actually a member of the society, I think, but I may be wrong there, who is clearly a noted archaeologist or interested in this kind of thing. And this was dug up at Ledston Hall, and John Davis described it as one of the most battered sundials he'd ever seen. And this describes its conservation. And given the incredibly terrible state it was in, it's remarkable that we can determine both the maker and from the coat of arms, which was also relates to the hall itself. And there is all this story of an association with Samuel Pepys and the rest of it. Just quite an astonishing whole sequence of connections from this very battered piece of copper alloy, as we describe it. And you'll notice in the first picture of it that there are 3 holes for the tenons. So it was a dial of quality in its originally. But I think maybe we move on to the next one after that. Who do we have following? Well, John Davis. I think he's with us too. Yes. Are you going to say anything about your mosaics? This was an extremely witty article, that John. I'm very glad you gave it to us. I found this most amusing. It's self-explanatory, like all John's articles, but somebody might have comments on it.
Hello, Frank. I'm here.
Yeah, I can see you. Yes. Anything to add to it?
Very little, really. I wrote almost none of what's actually there. I just got the pictures from the archaeologists who very kindly sent them to me, and the text comes direct from the museum, and I couldn't really fault it, so I just reproduced it.
Yes, why not? And it's both very witty, the man losing his sandal and all the rest of it. I enjoyed this, and I think it's just for us to note and pass on to Graham's article now, the Poor Man's Style Revisited. Graham, do you have anything to add to what you have written or said about this? Another entertaining article, I thought, following John's equally entertaining article on mosaics. So, Graham, have you lost us? Have we lost you? Is Graham still?
Graham is still on call.
Still on the list
Yes,
of participants.
yeah.
He's not.
One mo.
All right, here he is. Right. You back with us, Graham? I'm hearing you, not seeing you.
There's something with the camera, possibly this cover.
Right, so am I wanted? So this was all went a bit faster than expected.
Sorry.
Yeah, we can see you right now.
We can see you and we can hear you, and we've got your article in front of us. Would you like to add anything at all? You're allowed to say no.
Well, I don't have anything really to add. It just it'd be nice if someone could come up with an example of, although the chances at this distance in time is extremely small, given the probably rather dubious metallurgy that was used.
Yes, that's, I think, a fair conclusion. Any hands being raised, Martin? I can't see any. So
not at the moment.
Right. Well, those of you who read my invitation email will note that I said when we got to the natural finish, there would be a postscript, and I will provide the postscript. So, Martins, if you could
yes, I'm stopping share, and just I noticed there are some notes in them.
Okay, so
there's something in chat. Oh, okay. Sarah shared the images of that sundial mentioned previously.
Okay. So is it ready for me now?
Yes, you can see.
Okay, this is where I ended off, and I did say that I was going to. Sorry, a question?
No, and thankfully everyone is tolerably audible. The main problem seems to be that nobody is really reacting.
Okay.
I think you mute.
I'm muting.
Muting Graham.
Yes. Sorry.
Right. Well, this is a postscript. So those of you who feel it's time to go to bed or to get on with your morning, wherever you happen to be, this is the time to desist. I am going to choose one of these articles to say something about one aspect of it. And I'm going to choose the Wikanda article, 3 Norwegian sundials. And the middle of those 3, the number 2 dial is shown here. This is Johan's own sketch of this second of the 3 dials. And I should explain that this sundial is cut into rock. It's a horizontal sundial cut into rock in an island in a fjord in quite far north up Norway. So it's had several centuries of wind and weather getting at it. So it's in very poor condition now. But this is Johan's sketch, best estimate of what it was like when it was originally set out. And the thing that really intrigued me was that just by looking at this sketch and with a tiny bit of extra knowledge, you can come up with 2 candidate dates for when it was set out. And that sort of seemed unbelievable. But I had a 1-hour chat with Johan at the Exeter conference, and I can now share my thoughts on this with you all. That we first need to start by noting the ancient Scandinavian way of indicating time, and the means of telling time that we're used to as sundial people are either dividing the day into 24 equal intervals of time, calling them hours, of course, or perhaps dividing the daylight period into 12 equal intervals. This, of course, is the unequal hour system of indicating time. In both cases, we either have 12 or 24 hours. Scandinavian system was quite different. Instead, they divided the horizon into 8 equal intervals of azimuth angle, so 45-degree intervals. And I can represent this schematically just by this broken circle. Now imagine you are sitting or standing at the dot in the middle. This is your distant horizon drawn round you. And I've sketched in 8 radial tick marks dividing the horizon into 45-degree intervals. And they had names for these intervals. And they were known in the plural as etter, that's the way I'm going to pronounce it, the singular et. And the language of the day was Old Norse. What day? Well, we're talking here very roughly 6th, 7th century AD, so 1500 years ago. And this way of reckoning time by just using the position of the sun round the horizon persisted until the 17th, 18th century, so perhaps 1200 years. It persisted longest, surprisingly enough, not in Scandinavia itself, but actually in Iceland. That's an aside. You didn't have a gnomon or anything like that. You literally looked at which segment or which et the sun was in, and you partitioned your day. You can imagine having a work plan for the day. You notice which segment the sun is in, and you then look at your work plan and note what you should be doing at that time. Now, this is not exactly an engineering drawing of a sundial. You can't go around literally painting black tick marks on the horizon. The horizon is something of an abstraction. And so what they actually did was to identify 8 landmarks. They call them dagmark and day marks at 45 degrees around the horizon. And I'm going to invent a textbook example where we have 8 mountains and we're in a plateau surrounded by mountains, and 8 we've identified as being at 45-degree intervals for delimiting these etter. And so here are my mountains, and this is now actually sort of real sundial. You don't have to construct anything. You just have to remember these particular mountains as being reference points. Now, you might think, aha, I can see how this vaguely works. We've got 8 divisions of the whole day rather than 12. And perhaps they numbered these divisions. Now, we're used to seeing a 12-hour clock numbered 1 to 12 with 12 at the top. Maybe they had 8 o'clock and numbered these things 1 to 8. And particularly if they've been astute enough to note that in this textbook example, the foothills of these mountains have been carefully binary coded. Probably unlikely you'll find that in practice, but it looks good in a diagram. Sadly, this is not how they identified the different times of the day. You might think, okay, maybe they use the directions, north, northeast, east, and so on. Well, they didn't do that either, but it is very much worth pointing out that the day marks that they used were sort of centered between these cardinal and subcardinal directions. So in particular, the top in the diagram, the top et was centered on north with the two relevant day marks at 22.5 degrees either side. What they actually did was to give names, almost colloquialisms, rather like tea time or mid-afternoon. They're very imprecise in terms of description, but that's what they used, and I'm going to write them in. These are the 8 names in Old Norse, typically in use perhaps 7th or 8th century. And I should emphasize that Old Norse is the principal ancestral language of English. It sort of gradually changed into what's now called Old English, sometimes referred to as Anglo-Saxon, which then later became what you might loosely call Shakespearean English and eventually modern English, which means that some of the words are really not too difficult for native English speakers to understand without much need for translation. So if you look at the one at the top, you'll notice a diphthong, A-E, but also this very strange letter, which is letter D with a crossbar, and modern typesetters refer to it as a strike-through D. And it is pronounced, or was pronounced, very much like the English TH. So that particular et, I'm not going to say my Old Norse pronunciation is terribly reliable, but my guess is something like Mivnieti. And at the other extreme, due south, we have middag, no strike-through D there, and that's very obviously midday. It's not too different from English. Also, informally, they divided the day into sort of morning and afternoon. And if you look on the right, you can see morgun, very obviously the word for morning. And this one on the right, the east sector, is miver morgan, the middle of the morning. And on the left, we have miver aptan, not totally unlike the German word abend. This is sort of middle of the evening rather than the afternoon. I won't go through the detail, but by studying ancient Scandinavian time, I suddenly became interested in Old Norse, so probably more interested than you're likely to want to persist with. Now, eventually, they decided we'll invent a sundial. And so this is coming quite late in the day by comparison, maybe the year 1000, these started to come up, a sort of wheel shape with 8 lines. And the idea, you notice we don't have any sort of gnomon. You really do literally look at the sun and see which sector or which et it is in. Now, you may think this is a horribly dangerous way of telling time, but if you've ever been to Norway, you will know quite often you're very lucky to see the sun at all. And when you do see it, it's through sort of breaks in the cloud. And having a quick glance at the sun is not as dangerous as at first it sounds. We've got an enormous change of scale here from the horizon, which is in some literal sense at infinity, to this wheel shape, which if you look at Johann's diagram on the left, perhaps 15 centimeters across, 6 inches, very small object. And you could stand facing the sun, looking across this. Obviously you couldn't stand on it, it's smaller than your shoe, so you stand looking across it to the relevant et and know what you should be doing at that time of day. Well, you can see a gradual evolutionary process. Eventually they decided it might be a good idea to have a gnomon. So this little black circle represents the base of a vertical gnomon, beginning to correspond to Johann's diagram more and more closely. Of course, the shadow for the sun would be pointing away from the relevant et name, but by this stage, we don't actually need the et names. And next step in the evolutionary process was to have these subdivisions. Now, we are very, very close to Johann's sketch here, except what I've written in as subdivisions are not full length. And quite certainly I am wrong here, and Johann is right. I have never seen a sketch of an ancient Scandinavian sundial with different lengths of spoke in the wheel. I've done this though quite deliberately because for description purposes, it's easier for modern people to think in terms of principal divisions and subdivisions, especially because this division, the central division at the top of the diagram, is supposed to align with true geographic north. And this is the nub of the whole of Johann's story. If you look at Johann's diagram, you'll see that true north does not coincide with this particular subdivision. It's offset, according to Johann's diagram, by 11.5 degrees. So let me mark in where true north is, and it's an 11.5 degree offset from what should be the true north spoke in the wheel, if I put it in these informal terms. At this point, I confess to having psychological problems. I'm absolutely incapable of reading a diagram when north is not pointing straight up. So I'm going to rotate my diagram to suit my psychology, and my apologies for that if you are disturbed by doing this. So an obvious question is, why did they get it wrong? Well, there's lots of circumstantial evidence that this was marked out by sailors. It's on an island which really isn't readily accessible except by sailors. And it was a useful island for sheltering from westerly gales. So sailors could be here for 2 or 3 days at a time if it was a violent storm raging. And one conjecture, which we will eventually reject, is that they used a compass. And when they started setting out, they set their compass up and they chose for their principal direction where the compass needle, the north end of the compass needle settled down after swinging backwards and forwards. Well, that would make sense. But first point is that sailors actually knew about magnetic declination. That's something you would learn about quite early on. But much more important is that during almost the entire history of sundials of this nature, 1,000 years plus of this kind of sundial, as it happens in Norway, magnetic declination for almost all that time was to the east. So there are several reasons for rejecting the hypothesis that they used a compass in this kind of way. But we don't reject the compass hypothesis altogether, because they were using a marine compass. And here is my little diagram of a marine compass. And can you see, this has what I call a floating card. The circle bounded by the black line is a free floating card on a pivot. And the little broken line underneath is a bar magnet, which is deliberately offset from the north-south axis of the card by 11.25 degrees. Why such a strange angle? Well, it's not a strange angle if you are used to a 32-point compass. And those of us who live in the UK and regularly hear the shipping forecast will be thoroughly used to the 32-point compass that is used in directions such as north by west and so on. Well, this is 1 point of a 32-point compass. Divide 360 by 32 and you get 11.25. So this was a compass with a deliberate built-in 1 point east declination. And so during the years, approximate time when the magnetic declination in Norway was 11.25 degrees to the east, this compass, the north end with a little red dot, really would point to true north. But the declination gradually reduced over the years. And so those who made compasses started to manufacture compass which had a half point. Well, half 11 1/4 is 5 7/8 degrees. And so this is not offset quite so much. And both these companies, surprisingly, were in use for a very long period of time, including after the declination actually went through zero. Strange, but true. And given that story, backstory, let's see what happens if we, instead of using this simple compass, which I have currently on the dial, we use the compass, which I have at the bottom left with a deliberate 11 1/4 degree offset. So let's move that into the center and pretend that this happens to be at a time when the magnetic declination really was 1 point east, in which case the N with its little red dot really would be true north. Well, that wouldn't explain the offset that we actually have on this sundial. Now, there are some people, as you said, who enjoy watching paint dry. And let's suppose you have a really extreme psychological condition where even watching paint dry turns out to be too exciting for you. Well, instead, you can sit and watch a compass and steadily look at it as the declination gradually changes. And if you choose to look at this particular compass for perhaps 25 years, the declination will decrease by, say, 2 1/4 degrees. So we're now only 9 degrees east of the 9 degrees offset. So my dot has now moved. So it's 9 degrees offset from the declination is 9 degrees east. And if we go to 6 degrees east, 3 degrees east, and there comes a moment when the declination, magnetic declination in this part of Norway really went through zero. As a matter of fact, I think about 18 months ago, the declination in the UK, or quite large parts of it, was very close to zero. It was quite fun using a magnetic compass and discovering that it really did point to true north. Well, we're not quite right yet, because remember, this is 1 point, 11 1/4 degrees, and we need 11 1/2 degree offset. And so I'm going to go on 1/4 of a degree. And I will almost guarantee that unless you've got an extremely large screen or a hand lens, you won't notice any difference. But I really am going to rotate this another 1/4 degree. And that is 1640. 1640 was when it went through zero, and 1640 plus 2 or 3 years later, we'd lost that extra 1/4 degree. So if that form of compass had been used, this explanation would suggest that this was set out in 1640. But supposing they had this more modern compass, so let's put that one in the middle. Remember, this is 5 5/8 degrees. So I put the magnetic declination at 5 5/8 degrees. And again, we watch paint dry, but I'm going to speed things up a bit. Let's go straight to zero, the 1640 date. We've lost 5 7/8 degrees, but we need to 5 5/8 degrees, but we need to lose another 5 7/8 degrees to get the 11 1/2 degrees required. And that happens in 1670. So you now have two possible explanations. They used one or other of these compasses to set it out. They didn't allow for the fact that the declination had changed since they'd acquired the compass. And using compass on the left, this would have been set out a year or two after 1640, compass on the right, date 1670. So subject to a good deal of hand waving, you can estimate perhaps that this sundial was set out in 1640-ish or 1670-ish. Now, I don't know whether Johan has signed on, but I do notice that Roar Hagendaeus has signed up, and maybe Roar, you can make some comments on this. We have a real live Norwegian who is an expert on Norwegian compasses. So say a word or two about my explanation. How did I do?
I wouldn't say that I'm an expert, but I really like this explanation. I was in contact with you earlier today, and I have a similar sundial which relates to this problem. So I will have to talk more to you.
I think we're going to have more conversations, and I should say to everybody that in the September issue of a bulletin, there is an article quite different sort of article about a Norwegian compass, which is used as a sundial compass. So look forward to your September bulletin. And I very much hope that Roar will also write about this compass, which is this ancient Scandinavian dial, which has been missing since what, 1978, did you say? 1976.
Yeah, around that, but I believe it's older.
But oh yes, it was found in that was known about that its whereabouts disappeared, and Roar has recently rediscovered it.
Yeah.
I think it has various dates written on it, but to me, you watch the evolutionary process of this kind of sundial, I would guess that is more like 16th, 17th century.
Yeah.
But I look forward to your researches on this.
Yeah.
Anybody else got any questions, or can we all now go and have our suppers or whatever it is we're ready to do? So I will unshare my screen, so we can now go, if you wish, into gallery mode. There's still a lot of you there. Anybody got any tail end questions, or shall we conclude the meeting?
I think you can also comment on the format of such Zoom calls, so we could possibly improve from time to time further on how to make those Zoom calls more interesting, and let's say to provide you more possibilities to comment or to ask questions.
Absolutely right. I spent 40 years attempting to teach computer science at this university here in Cambridge. And there is a very famous computer scientist called Fred Brooks, who wrote a wonderful book called The Mythical Man Munch. And he said, whenever you are designing anything, you should throw the first design away. No matter how good it is, throw it away and start again, you'll get something much better. Well, we're now right at the tail end of this very first BSS Sundial Zoom event. I shall throw it away and press the leave button in a minute. But I very, very much welcome your feedback. How can we do better? It's ignoring my introduction, it's lasted about 70 minutes, which is probably the right sort of length for something like this. And my attention span wouldn't last much longer, I have to admit. And I do hope other people will contribute the postscripts in future. I can talk about sundials absolutely indefinitely, any sort of sundial forever, but that's not the object of this sort of meeting. I'm very happy for other people to find something based on an article in the bulletin. It will be the September bulletin next time round. And if they can see something which would make a sort of postscript that I've just given you, that would be absolutely wonderful. And perhaps I should thank David Coffey for his introduction to his backstory of his article, and especially to Jeff Thurston for telling us all about the Hong Kong dial. It was certainly very much a mystery as presented in the June issue. Anybody going to raise a hand to say something?
I'm going to raise a hand. I don't know if you can see my hand. It's Kevin Carney. I think just we should say thank you very much, Frank, for arranging this. It's a great idea. And I hope we have a number more of these. And I'm sure as we all get used to this kind of technology, we'll get better at interacting with it. So thanks very much. And thanks to Martin as well.
Yes, I'm especially grateful to Martin's. I find it, I have since lockdown given numerous talks. It must be getting on for a dozen talks to various people, many of groups I didn't know. In the absolute depths of lockdown, people were desperate to do anything, and I had astronomy groups finding me out, and then I had antique groups finding my names from somewhere, and church groups asking my views on sundials and prayer times. There was no amount of demand, and I learned the fact that I could give a Zoom talk. But actually manipulating all the controls and talking at the same time, I fear my brain wasn't up to it. And the older I get, the less able I am. So having young Martins around with youthful vigor doing this sort of thing is very great. I'm very grateful to him.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to contribute.
Yes, well, next one will be in October. Between now and then, we have in September the Newbury meeting, and I look forward to seeing some of you then. And I hope all of you, whenever it is we choose to have the October Zoom event. It will be roughly like this, subject to all the improvements that you're going to be suggesting to me. So thank you very much for participating.
Just a final note that we have planned to publish the recording on some British Sundial Society YouTube channel.
Yes, I should say that one of the reasons we recorded this was exemplified by an email I got today from a member in Australia, in New Zealand, who said, "Oh, I am delighted that you're putting on these Zoom talks. Unfortunately, you were holding it at 4 o'clock in the morning, my time, which is just a teeny bit too early for me. But the fact that you're recording it is splendid. So hello to you, Rosalind. I'm hoping you all enjoy this recording that you've just been listening to. This is why we have recorded it. So that's an explanation for doing the recording. So please feel free to leave. I will hang on a little bit in case somebody wants to say something to me. So thank you and goodbye.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much. This was fun.